What a perfect day for the Brooklyn Book Festival to be back and better than ever. It is wonderful to see so many Brooklynites out in the literary and publishing capital of the world, Brooklyn, New York. Let's give it a big round of applause. And can we give a big round of applause to all of the organizers and volunteers and people who put in blood, sweat, and tears year-round to make today and this weekend and this celebration of the publishing industry and books happen in Brooklyn? Can we give all the organizers a big round of applause? Thank you all so much. And my name's Lincoln Ressler. I'm the councilman in the neighborhood. I grew up a couple blocks over this way and live a couple blocks over this way. And ever since the book festival took over Columbus Park, it has been one of my favorite days of the year. And I'm so happy, post-COVID, post-everything, we're here and we're celebrating. And I'm really thrilled that the first panel of the day is focused on censorship. You know, PEN is one of the most inspiring organizations protecting free speech for journalists and writers around the world. And this work is more urgent than ever. You know, just this past year, across the United States, the American Library Association identified over 1,200 efforts to advance censorship in school districts, in libraries across our country. And it's getting worse by the year. And I'm really proud that here in Brooklyn, we're charting a different path forward. Our Brooklyn Public Library system has created Books Unbanned, where our librarians from the Brooklyn Public Libraries are giving out books and advising young people in cities and states and towns all across the country who don't have access to the same literature and writing that we do here. We also really need to focus, though, not just on literature that's being banned across our communities, but also we're seeing censorship by a lack of a free press. You know, here in New York City, the amount of media outlets are shrinking by the year. And some of our nonprofit media outlets are really struggling right now. You may have seen that WNYC Gothamist just announced a 12% layoff on Friday. The City, a great online publication, announced that all their staff are having to suffer 20% cutbacks in pay. We need to support these great online media, nonprofit media outlets so that we're getting the coverage and the oversight that we need to hold the powers that be accountable. It's critically important, and it's central to what we're doing here with the Brooklyn Book Festival is to make sure that we're all informed about what's happening in our communities and have access to the most amazing literature around. And so I'm excited to pass it to Sabir and who will introduce this amazing panel. Enjoy the day. It's a perfect day for Brooklyn. Thanks so much. Thank you, Sabir. Take care.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sabir. I'm the Associate Director of the World Voices Festival and Literary Programs at PEN America. Our mission at PEN America is to unite writers and their allies to defend free expression and celebrate the power of the written word. We champion the freedom to write and read and the freedom of imagination. We are a member-driven organization and have members in every U.S. state and chapter cities across the country, from Detroit to Tulsa and from Birmingham to Miami. Along with our members, we welcome all of you to help bring our mission to life. Please consider becoming a member and following us on social media. Visit our membership booth 427 for more details. Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter Joni Leeds will perform songs there later today around the rise in book bans. And so, it is my pleasure to introduce our PEN Presents event, Free the Books, for a dialogue with beloved writers on the recent and dramatic rise in the efforts to censor and silence Black and LGBTQIA+ perspectives. This event would not be possible without our amazing partnership with the Brooklyn Book Festival and their extraordinary programming team. Thank you for hosting us and showcasing some of the most exciting voices in contemporary literature on this great stage. We also want to thank our book-selling partner, Greenlight Bookstore. All of the authors' books can be purchased right over there, and they'll be signing right next to this stage immediately following the signing. And so, moderating this morning's conversation is Jonathan Friedman. Jonathan is the Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at PEN America. He will be joined by Casey McQuiston, New York Times bestselling author of novels such as Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I Kiss Sarah Wheeler, and Cheryl Willis Hudson, an independent publisher and children's book author. Both of our guests today, in addition to being accomplished authors, have had their works banned before. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jonathan, Casey, and Cheryl to the stage.
morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Sabir, for the introduction, and to all of our partners. So I'm Jonathan Friedman. I'm here from PEN America, and we're here to talk with some authors about the banning of books. And I am sure that many of you have read many things that are going on with book banning around the country and educational censorship more broadly. And what I will tell you is that it has become almost impossible, I know because I do this now every day, to keep up with it. It can feel very overwhelming. The stories of 50 books being pulled in Carroll County, Maryland recently, or hundreds of books being pulled from libraries still almost every week now in Florida, are just dominating and flooding. And so in our work at PEN, what we've tried to do is really help synthesize what's going on, help people keep track of the bills that are being proposed in state legislatures, the bans that are being advanced in school districts. And just please, if you're interested in these issues, if you want to talk to us, work with us, join the movement to push back on this. It is a movement that requires people, and it requires people to come together. It's a democratic moment and a kind of moral calling to stand up to this. So what I'll say is there's no question that this is all getting worse, and that the numbers don't lie. We recently released our 2022-2023 school year count of book bans, and now over the past 2 years we have found 6,000 books being banned. Now, some of these books are being banned, I shall say, temporarily. Sometimes there's a prohibition on, for example, in Iowa recently they said, here's a list of 400 books that will now be prohibited in schools because of an Iowa law. And after pushback and after people saying that's outrageous, the school district undid that and they allowed those books. So it does matter when people raise their voices. It does matter when people are paying attention to this. And it does. And there are numerous cases where we've been able to push back and restore access for the young kids who need it. So I am delighted to be here with Cheryl and Casey to talk about these issues and really to get the authors' perspective on this, because as an advocate, I have my thoughts about freedom of expression in schools and the freedom to read, but I think there's a really important role for authors to play in speaking about just what it's like to be impacted by this. So I'm wondering, first of all, if each of you could tell us a little bit about, when did you first hear that your books were being banned, and what was it like to hear that news, and how has it impacted you?
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and I'm so happy to be here. I am Cheryl Willis Hudson. I'm an author. I'm also an editor and a publisher, so the bans and the challenges to books affects me in a myriad of ways. I first heard about a challenge to a book that I had written in 2021, and it was challenged in York, Pennsylvania. The outcome of that was really that I found out about it in the newspaper. I saw a copy of books that were banned laying on the ground. And one of the titles was My Friend Maya Loves to Dance. And I'm saying, why would this book be banned? It's a book about a little black girl who just loves to dance. And thinking about it, it just hit me right here in the chest, because there's nothing racist about it. There's nothing that uses the word African American. There's nothing about critical race theory or the kinds of things that people were talking about. It was just a little book with a black kid on the cover. And that's a dangerous thing when people are targeting books just because of the color of the skin of a protagonist in the book. So it hits us hard editorially, and from the point of view is that somebody wants this kind of story erased.
For me, I think it was also 2021, and I got an email from my editor just letting me know, hey, your book is under investigation for obscenity in the state of Oklahoma. And I was like, okay, well, it's an adult romance novel, so I'm curious how they're defining obscenity, because that's what a romance novel is it's romance. And what happened to me is kind of similar to what happened with Genderqueer, where it was a book that was written for adults and like maybe some upper young adults, and that's how it was marketed. And then we were both nominated for the Alex Award by the ALA, which recognizes books that were not written specifically for young adults, but that have a lot of crossover appeal and that a lot of young adults are independently picking up and reading and enjoying, and maybe they get something out of it. And because of that, then libraries will look at that list and start to stock it. And that really, really scared apparently the state of Oklahoma. And it was, to me, it was interesting because I did not see anything like that happening to a straight adult romance novel. None of them, like, in my opinion, if you're going to investigate one adult romance for obscenity, you should just look at the entire section and decide what is rated NC-17 or what is rated R. So it was really just frustrating from the sense of, I know this is not a treatment that 99% of my peers in this genre are going to receive from libraries, and that makes me really sad. Makes me very angry too.
Yeah. Thank you both. And I think as I think about, the points that you're both raising, I think what's really important for people to understand is how multifaceted what we are facing is. And so there are different threads in this, and when you start getting into the specifics of any one case, Central York, Oklahoma, you're going to, it's going to be different. It's going to be why was this book challenged? And in many places, people feel that what they're doing to, quickly remove books from access or put them on a prohibited list, it feels justified in that local context. But you cannot deny that there is a movement behind this, okay? That there's an energy that is somewhat unprecedented. There is a kind of coming together of deliberate, conscientious forces to put books like yours on lists, to circulate those lists to school districts and to say, you don't have to read these books. It doesn't matter exactly what is in them. They have these words, or they have these stories, or they fit into these broad categories. So I can just flip to a page of an image or what's on the cover, and that can be, enough to remove that book. And I was wondering if both of you could talk about like how how that hits you. The idea that your book ought to be reduced to a word, a phrase, a page, an image, versus understanding a work of literature as a whole.
It's hard hitting. We've got to look at the thread of history in this country. If you go back to the 1700s, there were laws on the books prohibiting blacks from learning to read or write, enslaved people. There were laws that said that people who taught the enslaved to read or write could be whipped or punished in some kind of way. So there's a history of racism about literacy in this country that has become a part of the institutionalized presentation of racism. Not per se, racism per se, but just in the fabric of this country. So a lot of times, books, ideas about black people are part of the stereotypes that are passed down generationally. So in the sense of the 1700s, the 1800s, before the Civil War, black people were not considered human beings. So that's an erasure. And that's part of the thinking that goes behind some of these groups, really, that are saying, you don't deserve to be in a book. You don't deserve to have your history told. You don't deserve to speak your own truth. Up until 1965, when Nancy Larrick wrote an article about the all-white world of children's book publishing that I think appeared in National Magazine, there were very few books at all that included people of color or gender-specific stories. or even stories highlighting girls and their activities. So there's a long list of targeted areas of history. So that really has to go into consideration when you're thinking about censorship and banning of books. I wanted to show this cover again. My friend Maya loves to dance. I had gotten a review one time on this book that why are you talking about a little black girl who loves ballet? You know, why not? It's a story about a kid who likes to dance, and she does it in different ways. It has nothing to do with race per se, but again, the challenge is to your absolute being. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but the historical thread is there. So we have to be very careful about censorship and targeting, because it really undermines the whole system of democracy and freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of thinking.
I think you're absolutely right in that taking one image out of context is so terrifying to people who oppose these things, because it is just undeniable proof of existence of a person. And that is something that people want to squash so intensely. I mean, I think about the Hays Code when I'm thinking about, you know, censorship of queer art. I think about the Hays Code. I think about denial of the AIDS crisis for years and years, and how it was like the silent epidemic. And, you know, when you see an image of a graphic novel that has someone on the page who is just doing something as simple as like a kiss between two girls, it is so difficult for people to have anything less than an intense reaction to that when they feel threatened by the existence of that person. And they want to go back to when we had silent epidemics and we had, you know, full censorship of anything below the waist in movies, because it might, you know, corrupt our youth or whatever. I think it's so, as an author, you spend all of this time crafting something that is, especially for like a long novel, that is so deeply personal, and it's at least hopefully nuanced and full of a lot of complexity and layers, and then you see like one screenshot taken out of context. Like I think about panels from Genderqueer that were taken out of context. I mean, I went through a blog today of all the shocking images from Genderqueer that are just very matter of fact, like autobiographical snapshots of someone's life. It is so painful as somebody who relates very deeply to that experience that's depicted in that book, for it to be like this simple fact of existence that I see in one panel drawn by one person in a story of their own life is so absolutely shocking to me that I will make it the most banned book in America. That to me, you know, is just wild, and it's frustrating as writers who try very hard just to instill our work with the simple act of existence, for that existence to be reduced to one shock value image that you can make go viral on Facebook, you know.
Yeah, and the political opportunism around that is a key part of it. How does that happen, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I wish that an informed conversation about all of this around the country, a nuanced conversation. You know, you take something like Genderqueer and that book that has been, you know, excerpted and vilified. You know, one of so many. And what's really interesting to me when you actually read that book cover to cover is what an impactful book it is. It's, you know, talking about asexuality, actually. It's talking about consent. It opens your eyes to the experience of a person that is really not reflected, you know, is barely reflected in any other media whatsoever. And I think that we are in a kind of moment of change around this where, ironically, perhaps, it is because of that free expression. It is because of that opportunity for artists and others like Maya Kobabe to tell, you know, a very personal story, and for that to be read by other people that's having an impact. And I think there a lot about not just the freedom to express and create art and tell that story, but the freedom to read. Because, you raised a really interesting point, Casey, earlier about, is it obscene? And we see so much discussion now about like pornography, and a lot of these words are being twisted. We actually, it's not so unsettled as an area of law. What a pornographic magazine versus a book of literary value is. I actually think the vast majority of librarians, citizens, adults can look at those two things and understand that they're different and they were designed with different purposes in mind. Nonetheless, there is this effort to collapse them, to label all kinds of things as though they are something that they are not. And I think what's really interesting also is there is not an age at which you suddenly, are guaranteed constitutional freedoms. And of course, this is a very complicated question in schools. But there seems to be this idea out there that we can collapse all debate on this in terms of notions of age appropriateness to be determined by whoever is, angriest or most interested in censorship. And that is just so dangerous. This idea that if it's inappropriate to me, it ought to be banned from a school for everybody else. And so I'm always wondering, how you both think about the freedom to read, whether you think about that as something that was important in your own life or for young people today.
I went to evangelical Christian school for 13 years, so I can very much speak to the experience of having basically anything that even referenced sex censored from me. And by that I mean literally like the chapter on sexual reproduction in my biology textbook being taped shut when I got it at the beginning of the year. Like I'm talking abstinence only. There is no age for it to be appropriate to be taught in school when in a setting like that. And I can tell you the result for me and for my classmates was that we had no concept of what consent meant or was. Every sexual act is equally forbidden, and so you have no concept of what is a bad thing to happen to you, and you end up in dangerous situations. You have unhealthy or factually or scientifically incorrect ideas of your own body or sex or whatever. And I can tell you right now, it did not prevent me from sitting before you as a queer and trans author of smut, if you want to call it that. It just didn't work. It didn't work, and what it did cause was a lot of us had to go to a lot of therapy, and really, I think that what parents should be concerned about right now in terms of like what their kids have access to, they should be so much more concerned about like what their social media algorithms are feeding them, what kind of like YouTube alt-right rabbit holes they're being sucked down. They should not be. Libraries are one of the only places in the world where kids can now just freely go out and take something off a shelf just because it looks interesting and not because it was fed to them by like a content machine. They are able to like go and browse and be like, I relate to this. I see someone on this cover that looks like me. My friend told me they like this and I read it and I'm going to read it. And I think that is such an important part of discovery in adolescence and how I learned so much about myself when I couldn't get it at school. And it's just so scary to think that kids who need access to those books and need access to that information about themselves couldn't be able to get it by walking into even a public library. I think the freedom to read is the freedom to know it's okay to exist in the world around you in a lot of ways for a lot of young people.
Freedom to read is so important. I grew up in the South, in Virginia, where it was still illegal for blacks and whites to marry one another. The schools that I attended were all black because we were still under the system of Jim Crow. The books that we read and the textbooks that we had in school had no people of color, no black people. And the chapter, I remember fourth grade Virginia history, chapter on slavery, and distinctly remembering that the commentary said that slaves were happy, and they, deserved the lot that they had. These books were chosen by the school board system. We had some of the same books that the white kids had, but the black kids had different books. And the freedom to read is just so important, because having those books, you could read about yourself, but you could read about yourself from the eyes of someone else who was controlling your destiny. So as an author, and being part of the literary community, I mean, and just as a kid, there was always something wrong. There was always something missing. There was always something embarrassing about being black or being a Negro at that time, or being colored. So going into publishing was something that I did consciously, along with my partner, my husband Wade, and we established a company, Just Us Books, to really address the lack of information, the lack of true stories, the lack of authenticity in our existence, so that you could have Jamal's Busy Day about a little black boy who loves to go to school, which is sort of counteractive to the narrative that is presented in the news, that black kids are going to drop out of school, that they don't read, that they don't like to do what other kids do. So I can't tell you how important it is to have an authentic voice in the mix of both story and publishing, and bringing those things to fore, and raising your voice. Again, one of the books that was challenged was an anthology that we did, which has the title, We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices. And this is like an anthology that includes multicultural voices, Native American voices. I Can Do It. All of a number of the contributors are people who have been banned, whose individual work has been banned, like Jackie Woodson, Innocente Nagara, Tanya Bolden, I'm trying to think, Ashley Bryan, Zetta Elliott. Those people's books are banned because of their name and their recognition as people who represent different points of view. So freedom to read opens that door in public libraries and in schools. We did not have those choices when I was growing up, and a lot of children do not have those choices now, because books are being taken off the shelf because of the author's name, because of the what's on the cover of the book, because of the title of the book, Raise Your Voice.
You know, you're making me reflect. I want to use the phrase "missing from the shelf," and "missing from the shelf" was actually the title of a report that PEN America wrote with our Children and Young Adult Book Committee, which is a longstanding committee of authors at PEN, back in 2015 or 2016. So, you know, in a different moment before we were now, and it was all about the lack of diversity in books, in book publishing, which has been a theme that PEN America has other reports on more recently. Which continues to be a challenge, but also just the lack of access to those stories in schools. And I think a lot about what may not be well understood, but is very clear from where I sit, is that, you know, as a long-term advocate for these freedoms for young people in schools and universities, a lot of the energy of what we're currently facing began in response to the 1619 Project. It was sort of built on the, the mass sort of public misinformation about that project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, some of which, you know, was academic intellectual criticism, but then it sort of took on a different phase of just kind of public smearing. And the first bill that I saw to say, you know, if a school teaches this content, we will take away its public funding, said very clearly, if the school teaches curriculum related to the 1690 Project. And out of that came all of these bills that we've seen in numerous states, and out of that came attacks on, you know, if you sort of close your eyes, you'll remember the last 3 years, critical race theory, DEI, LGBTQ, now it's turning into an attack on gender and sexuality and anything quote-unquote woke. And so there's a kind of carousel of targets here. But when you sort of pause and look back, it really started in response to the 1619 Project and the energy that was fed off of that. And I want to say one other thing which I think is critical for you both to know, which is, you know, how did your books get targeted, right? Why these books, why these authors? And in Central York, it was a list of 400 books which had been collated in reaction to the murder of George Floyd to support diversity and inclusion in schools. You know, one of the things that was on the list, which was banned whole cloth, so nobody necessarily even knew all the books that were being on that list because they were just saying, oh, well, here's a list of diversity. That's a bad word. Let's prohibit everything on it. It included like a Sesame Street town hall about racism. That was like on that list, whether the school board who did that realized that or not. And so there's something really important to recognize about the crassness of that, the callousness of that, the inattention actually, to the content of the books. For all of the stories where it's like very much about that very particular part of the book, there's these other stories that it's like nobody even looked at what the books were on the list at all. They're just these long lists. And in your case, Casey, talking about the Alex Award, it has also been very much the case that you have situations where the ALA or somebody else might put out a list of books that have positive LGBTQ representation for teenagers, and then that becomes, oh, there's a list of 10 books. That becomes the list of 10 books to be banned. And so in both of your very personal cases with your works, you're caught up in this moment, which is very much reactionary to actually, quite literally, the very forces that were trying to diversify the books missing from the shelves. And so I'm just curious, if you have any reflections and reactions to that, understanding that piece of the puzzle.
It's just crazy. Did a little research again on why We Rise, We Resist, We Raise Our Voices was banned or challenged in a school system in Texas. Went online and found a sheet requesting that the book be removed from the shelves. And I think this is one person in the Eads, district in Austin, Texas. And I read the reasons for the book being banned or challenged. It said, promotes discrimination, mentions Black Lives Matter movement, and anything that has this in it is to be challenged. I wouldn't recommend it. And I'm thinking, what? The stories in this anthology are stories about love and truth and self-acceptance and being able to do it. And then I read, it was reconsidered by the board, and this was in 2021. And all of the objections the answers to all of the objections were positive. This book promotes diversity. This book shows a balance of different cultures. So people who are putting these books on lists are just photocopying the list and passing them on. They're not reading the books. And that's the danger of the movement that is organized by Moms for Liberty and 2 or 3 other groups that have, they have people just sitting and filling out these forms and filling out, and the danger is that one person removed this book from the shelf, so a whole bunch of other people could not read it, and I don't know how long it stayed off the shelf, but it was defended and put back on the shelf after the committee reviewed the book. So books languish on lists with the very qualities that you want to see in literature and very standards that school boards and school administrations want in terms of the books for age appropriate or otherwise in their curriculum.
Yeah. I mean, that is so, the photocopying the list, so true. I can't tell you how many articles I've read about this topic, and they interview like a woman from Moms for Liberty or a parent who's leading the charge on this, and they're like, well, I saw this title on a list of titles on Facebook, and so I contacted my library. I would be shocked if I shouldn't say any, but if most of the people who lead these challenges have read every book they're challenging cover to cover, I would be absolutely shocked. I genuinely think you can go through the list and you can almost guess exactly why each one of those books wound up on that list, and 9 times out of 10, it's the title or the cover. and it's no deeper than that. Like, All Boys Aren't Blue has, a portrait of George M. Johnson on the cover, and they have flowers around their face and like trans flag colors, and it's beautiful. That is the second most challenged book in America. The first most challenged book in America is called Genderqueer. Like, these people are not going past the cover. I do not believe that they are. And when they do, I also don't think it's a coincidence that the most challenged book in America is a graphic novel, because there's pictures. I'm telling you, these people, I don't believe these people are like reading, they're looking at screenshots out of context. There's just not, it's so reductive. It is so bad faith. It's a joke to me. It's just absolutely bad faith. And I mean, when I came into publishing, I was one of the first, I wrote one of the first, like, big five, or big four, I guess now, queer romance novels to be published. And that book was out in 2019. It took it like a year or two to get challenged for obscenity. How many bodice rippers have existed in the history of time? And that have never been challenged for obscenity by Oklahoma or any state. It is so transparent and so obvious that people, I don't think these are readers. I genuinely don't think these are readers who have any context for the books that they're banning or any deep knowledge of the content of those books. I genuinely think they just are hopping on a bandwagon because I think this is like a test. It's how far can we go? What can we get away with in pushing these people we don't want to see out of public life? We want to push these people back out to the margins. We don't want to see them anymore. What can we get away with? And this is like, it's a testing of the water. It's a dipping of the toe. And that's why we have to take it seriously. Even though the overwhelming majority of voters in this country oppose book bans, these people that continue to push it do have some power with harassing people and with getting people elected to local legislature. We have to take it seriously because this is phase one of a bigger thing. Well, it's phase like 1 million, but you know what I mean. Like, it is an early step in a bigger thing.
And it's continuing, and I think, from where I sit, I get the different strands of this. I get stories of how this is impacting plays that students can do in schools, or how it is impacting field trips to local museums. Last year in Miami, there was a play by Nilo Cruz that high school students have been bused to see every year. It's a kind of Cuban queer gay story. He's a gay playwright. He's Cuban, and the school district decided basically, although nothing has really changed here, we aren't going to bus students to see this play anymore. And so it's having this kind of diffuse impact. You hear stories about teachers being fired for, encouraging students to sing Rainbow Land by Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton in a concert that happened in Wisconsin. That teacher was fired. There's a fired teacher in Georgia who bought a book at a Scholastic book fair and read it to her kids. The book is called My Shadow is Purple. That's the controversial title of that one. Fired. She was fired for that. And she was fired, they said she broke one of these, vague education censorship laws, which are so vague they can be enforced however people want. And I think that's a key thing here, is that there's a small number of people who started with pressure on school districts. They started with excerpts from books. They started connecting across numerous state lines, but now they've got political power. And so in many bills that are being advanced or now becoming law in many states, you can see how they're trying to present the law as serving all parents and all parents' rights. And it's a very powerful rhetoric, particularly in light of social media, to say, we need to, the world feels like it's getting out of control. And if you're the kind of parent who feels that way about the world, it appeals to you just instinctively. Oh, yeah, I ought to have more care, right, concern, responsibility, whatever it is, more power, over my children. But it is impacting everybody. And it makes the one person who wants to challenge the book in Texas, or the one person who's been seeing these things on Facebook, have this outsized power. And so this is how we get things like an Arthur book. Arthur the Aardvark was challenged in a Florida district. because the book was going to be available. The person who challenged it said it would be available to fifth graders, and it referenced "Spin the Bottle" on one of the pages towards the end of the book. Now, it doesn't even actually talk about the game. There's just sort of a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke on the last page, and they felt that that was, sexual content that shouldn't be available to fifth graders. And of course, again, most of us are not confused about these lines, and there is this effort to kind of stretch the definitions. So I think there's no question that we face a very particularly empowered, emboldened movement. It's a number of individuals who are having this sort of outsized influence in their communities, and they're weaponizing systems that were designed to allow kind of like an individual parent to, maybe talk with a teacher about their own student, but they're having this power over everybody else. A Virginia librarian recently told me, she'd been doing this for like 20 years. She said, I've had a handful of parents over 20 years ask me for exceptions to be made for their individual students about what we teach and what they can read. It never turned into a national movement. I would just accommodate them. We would work it out. We would talk to each other. But that's how you can see that all of this is not about that. So my question to you both, from where you sit as authors, what are you hearing from other authors? What do we do?
We've got to fight back, and authors, there's no reason that authors have to defend their books. I mean, there should be no reason to defend your books. But I have heard anecdotally stories of authors who have gone to school board meetings to represent themselves and also to see what is being done in the local school district. And by presenting their books, by saying, this is what my book is about. Everything is taken, a lot of things are taken out of context. And I think graphic novels are a part of that, showing screenshots, or even in some of the commentary that's made about individual books, reasons for taking, they go through page by page why something is anti-racist or racist or discriminatory. We've got to fight back as authors and publishers too, because I think there's a soft censorship of, okay, this is, people are not going to buy a book because it's talking about slavery or talking about the beginnings of America in 1619 as opposed to 1776. That's what we've got to do, and that's what happened in Central York, Pennsylvania, where some of the books, a great number of them, were put back on the shelves. We've got to be aware. We've got to work out.
Yeah, I mean, we do. We absolutely have to fight back. We have to take it seriously. Like, we are embroiled in what is currently like the front line of like a culture war against children, and specifically marginalized children in this country. And, it looks and sounds very similar to the same efforts to take away trans healthcare, like gender-affirming healthcare for trans minors. Those, like, the statistics look almost identical, and who supports that and who supports book bans. And so for me, what I do is reach out to like librarians and teachers in my community. How can we help? What do you guys need? Like, what is good support for you? And yeah, just that. I really think that teachers and librarians are like our biggest allies, and
absolutely
have to throw our weight behind them.
And the Children's Book Committee of Penn has always been active in defending books that were challenged. I remember 15 years ago when I joined Penn, of letter writing to support books that had been challenged. I think Roby Harris's book, it's amazing, about child sex, just about sex education.
It's Perfectly Normal.
And it's Perfectly Normal.
That's the name of that book.
Supporting that, yeah. And she's done several books, which are wonderful books, informational, nonfiction. It's a big challenge, but we've got to be supportive, and we've got to continue to write. And we've also supported legislation. I think Jamie Raskin just submitted a resolution in Congress to support authors, illustrators, and naming books that were banned and have been challenged. So we know about it, and so that the Congress is behind us in terms of freedom of expression, freedom to read.
Senator Schatz had a similar resolution as well this week, along with Raskin. Yes, Roby Harris, It's Perfectly Normal, and I think that book and the way that it was challenged, for years before any of this, speaks so much to Casey, also everything you were saying about growing up with that, the pages that might have explained that to you taped shut. So I really just want to thank everyone for being here and welcome you all to join us in this movement. If you're passionate about these issues, you can find our information at PEN America at pen.org/action. This today kicks off Banned Books Week, and we'll be doing programming around New York City and around the country. We are working to support authors, to bring readers together, and more, we have to stand with our librarians, teachers, principals.
Absolutely.
Whether they're on the front lines of this, whether it's in New York and you think that it's impacting them or not, I guarantee you it is. Even here in New York, there was a recent drag show, children's drag queen story hour at a Brooklyn Public Library, which had to be canceled because of a bomb threat. So that's been happening all around Chicago, and that's happening right here. So this isn't just Florida, it's not just Texas, it's not just Central York or Oklahoma or anywhere else, it's here. As we close, I want to thank you all for coming and say that you can find out more information from us at PEN America at our booth, which is just over my left shoulder, and that after this, our authors, who are gracious for being here, we will be signing their books at the table next to the main stage over here with Greenlight Bookstore, and that's a wrap. So if you'll join me in a round of applause for our panelists, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Free the books.
Free the books.